I came before you a couple weeks ago to discuss Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis and Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade and their romantic relationship. It has become abundantly clear that this case is prosecution for personal profit. One of the things I keep hearing about is conflict of interest. A conflict of interest refers to ethical problems that may arise between parties with a pre-existing relationship. He or she may not join with a client in business without making full disclosure of his or her potential conflicts, and he and she must avoid commingling funds. Ms. Willis' longtime friend stated the romantic relationship started in 2019, making it a pre-existing relationship, and there was definitely commingling of funds. It is obvious Ms. Willis used poor judgment. One, she hired an attorney that was not qualified for the biggest case she has ever prosecuted. Two, she obviously was blind to invoices. Mr. Wade billed 24 hours in one day, and she approved the invoice.
I think the key here is how to go forward, because clearly Wade is off. But I think that this is such a huge body blow, almost a fatal blow to Fani Willis. I think the way forward is she has to voluntarily recuse herself. I don't know that she has it in her, but I think she has to say, I'm going to appoint a chief assistant who's going to oversee this case. She clearly has no credibility with this judge, and these issues are going to be taken up. And the judge invites these issues to be taken up by all sorts of other Georgia regulators, including the Georgia Assembly, the Fulton County Board of Commissioners, the State Ethics Commission. I mean, he lists that. So I think the best thing, if your first interest is the sanctity of this case, which I agree with you, Joe, this is the most important case in Georgia, and of the four Trump cases, this may be the most important because it's one that will last regardless of whether Donald Trump wins the presidency or not. If your first interest is this case, I think she needs to remove herself voluntarily and just say someone else is going to oversee this case in Georgia, so that whatever happens to her in terms of ethics, it doesn't taint this case.
There was a failure to be as completely honest with the tribunal as these folks should have been. The quote that is really sticking in my mind right now is when he talks about the testimony of Nathan Wade and Fani Willis. He basically says that they did not put concerns that were raised by the defendants to rest, that while the defendants did not prove that there was an actual conflict of interest and meet their burden of proof, an odor of mendacity remains. That's a direct quote from page 16 of this opinion. And he says he's not under an obligation, again, I'm quoting to you, to ferret out every instance of potential dishonesty from each witness or defendant ever presented in open court, but reasonable questions about whether the district attorney and her hand-selected lead SATA, that means Special Assistant District Attorney, testified untruthfully about the timing of their relationship, further underpin the finding of an appearance of impropriety and the need to make proportional efforts to cure it.
The one that, when I first heard it, I said, well, she's lying. And you would think if you're going on a church pulpit that is going to be broadcast. I mean, this is essentially her first public remarks after my motion was filed, and she doesn't tell the truth. The third person on this case did not make the same rate as the others. And, that's the first thing that stuck out to me. I mean, facts matter, words matter, the truth matters, and that was patently false. So, especially since I was, called a liar so many times and things that I said was patently false, if I'm going to get on national TV and talk in a church to God, I'm going to make sure that I've got the facts right. And John Floyd, the third prosecutor on this case, is not paid the same rate as the others. Plus, the work is very different. And I've analyzed this. I've lived with this for almost 6 months. So I know these records like the back of my hand. You've got three different prosecutors billing very different amounts, doing very different work. Nathan Wade bills sitting there. So he bills sitting in court watching John Floyd or Anna Cross do work. They don't bill sitting watching him do work. So that was one big distinction. Second, they're not sleeping with her. So that's a big distinction. Third, they're not all being paid the same rate. And fourth, their qualifications are extremely different. I have known all three of them for the better part of 20 years. And so, race doesn't play into any of those factors. And so all of those things were left out of it. So that was the first takeaway I got from that church speech. And we have a family chat, as a lot of people do, I'm sure, a family chat where your kids are chatting, texting. And my 14-year-old daughter literally texted the family chat and said, this lady is on TV calling mom and dad racists. Like, does she know them? And that was the first thing, the conversation in our family. We're the last people that you would call racist. And so, I had a lot of community outreach from that. A lot of people from the community said, I can't believe that. That's not who you are. That's such a far stretch from the truth. So that was surprising. There's folks out there that maybe could be called racist, but we're not one of them. So that was really surprising, particularly since she knows me and she's known me for so long. People don't take to the pulpit and, say that Jesus has told them to prosecute, to bring these charges, that she's doing God's work, that she's following his playbook, asking for guidance since she is following his plan. I mean, that's a very interesting take and a very tough thing to guard against.
Interesting decision-making for Fani Willis here.
Well, look, Tom Dupree, former federal prosecutor, told me last hour, this is a win for Donald Trump and the defendants. So what's interesting about that is he's been racking up those wins. And they may seem like they're small, but it's eating into the narrative that the left has had, that the indictments will slow him down and that he won't be able to run. Well, now they are both presumptive nominees, Biden and Trump. And that isn't working out quite the way they saw it. Now, he does have some court dates coming up, and let's not be, shy about the fact that it could get bumpy for him. It could get bumpier for Biden with the border. So it's going to be interesting. But how this plays a role today is a victory for Trump and those defendants. It's another kind of check in the boxes down the line for those defending President Trump, because Fani Willis has turned out to be more drama outside the courtroom than in.
And we all look forward to seeing Judge McAfee's decision, which could come any time up until Friday. He said Friday's the cutoff of whether Fani Willis is disqualified. And hinging on this is the standard he uses. If he uses appearance of a conflict of interest, much easier to meet. It's what a reasonable person would perceive as a conflict, which many reasonable people would look and say there's a conflict there, or actual conflict of interest. That would need to be proven that, one, this relationship began prior to the case, and number two, that Fani Willis directly financially benefited. So that's a much higher bar.
I've liked the judge so far. I mean, having watched a lot of these proceedings and this ruling, I think is right. Emily, I think, is spot on. She's exactly right. I think there was a lot of political pressure to get as many indictments against Donald Trump as possible. They wanted the highest count possible. So much of this is about timing, and what this does is it delays it. They can refile it, but November is the deadline, essentially. We're going to know who the president is or who is not, and I think there's political pressure to get this done as fast as possible, not administer justice.
When do we hit that point? Is it June?
Well, people say the election is in November. It's really not. It's the end of September, because that's when early voting starts.
Yeah.
That's true.
That's the election. The election is the end of September.
It's a big deal. Tammy, and then all of this comes back to public perception, because this is in the middle of an election. And, I just was reading the Associated Press and their reporting of this morning, and just one line stuck out to me. They said, she's using the RICO statute, and then there's this sentence they use. The case uses a statute normally associated with mobsters to accuse the former president, lawyers, and other aides of a criminal enterprise to keep him in power. That's the Associated Press.
Yeah, and that was the point. This has been their campaign. And remember, what they all thought was going to happen at the beginning was that this would crush Trump psychologically. It would crush his supporters. It would be over. This was the narrative. And then we saw the opposite happening. But that's why it was like throwing the kitchen sink and all the noodles on the fridge. Everything that would stick would have to go, thinking that's all that it would take. That would give them the time they needed, because that was the campaign. So this becomes now about credibility. Her credibility with the other issue about her own behavior, about what she campaigned on, about being a legitimate person who wouldn't have affairs with people in her office, combined with this is what you do. And of course, when you find out that you just threw it into the sink, you didn't know what you were doing, perhaps, to your point, it means that the American people feel more confident in President Trump at this point.
Can I say something real quick? The reason I asked June is because I'm wondering if you have to get it in before those conventions start. Because if it looks like that narrative isn't sticking, and the Democrats have to do something else, I mean, they can't make them any younger. So what are they going to do? Will they appoint somebody? Will they vote for somebody else at their convention?
They'll switch him out at that point.
We'll see. Well, we are watching, and Friday is coming quick. We will cover all the breaking news on the Fani Willis case.
What's your reaction to what happened today in Georgia?
It was a step in the right direction. It goes to the sloppiness of, frankly, the prosecutors down there. We know that that's the case, and more importantly, that this should not have been brought in general. The attorney handling this case put out a statement that I think says it all. And at the end of the day, remember, we've got a prosecutor here who's currently being questioned about her own ethical obligations, her ability to even stay on this case. I'm going to defer to this judge to make the right decision, but today was a good step in the right direction.
What do you think it means for whether or not he will decide to remove Fani Willis from this case? What does your gut tell you on this, Alina?
I don't think it's indicative necessarily of his actions in terms of Fani. I think that Fani, whatever she calls herself, she's got her own issues that are outside of this case that clearly have permeated her decision-making ability. And as I've always said, as my clients always said, we know that these were motivated by one thing and one thing only, and that's election interference that's trying to bring Trump down. And on the heels of last night, I think that it's very clear that the American people are seeing it for what it is and are going to stand up and not take it very much. This is political. There's no place for this in America. DAs and AGs should not be visiting the White House and the administration before bringing complaints against the leading front-running candidate for the Republican Party because Joe Biden can't walk and can't spell Bob backwards. That's not our problem. That's their problem. But it's very clear what the motivation is. And I think the president's frustrated for the nation and ready to get back to work in November.